All right, everybody, welcome back to another video here from Top Comics Pressing. In this video, what I want to do is go over the curse of staples, particularly as they apply to modern comics, and especially as you consider setting up a press on a modern comic. So for those of you that are unaware of the process, typically what you do is you take some kind of buffering material inside of a comic and you put it in there before it goes in the press. And the reason for that is that the staples have a physical thickness, and if you push a lot of force and squish all the paper together, you're going to get an imprint of that staple right here. And so what you do to prevent that is you put a buffer in the middle of the comic while you press, and the intent of that buffer is to fill a space about the width of that staple. And the most common buffer one uses is a backer board. So this is the same thickness as a regular comic book backer board. And this happens to be a magazine size, which is what I use for my press. And that's what's recommended in the CPR comic pressing book. This has a couple of examples of stacks in them. And so this is an example of how to set up your press for various ages. So that's all in the book. But one of the things that's a little bit hard to glean from simply reading the book is understanding how having different staples will affect your stack. So the most common stack is, again, a magazine backer board in the middle. And then when you press, the book will press under the book and squish into the backer board, and then the pressure on top will push the comic into the backer board, and the staple will sit exactly where that backer board is, and it'll keep it from having an indent right in this area. Now that is okay, except not all staples are created equal. And so because of that, you have to adjust the thickness of your stacking layer to match that staple. And that sounds easy, but it's actually more difficult to do because there really are integer numbers of backer boards. And if you use 2 backer boards, that's okay for some era of book, but it's going to cause a problem on others. And as I'll show you here in a minute, some staples are too small to use even a single backer board with. And so because of that, I have a different kind of smorgasbord here of stacking materials. So sometimes I will use 2 regular sheets of printer paper. So this is just generic 20-pound printer paper. And so that makes a good stacking material. The other thing that makes a good stacking material is cardstock, and cardstock comes either in 65-pound or 110-pound. And these are 2 sheets of 65-pound cardstock, which is my most common size. So for a quote normal staple here, I've selected this copy of Stranger Things #1. If you open it up, you can see that there are staples in there, and these match roughly the thickness of most Marvel and DC comics from the late 70s through the early 2000s. And so this is kind of the default size. I would use a regular backer board with that. And just so you can get an idea of how thick these are, I'm going to lift this up to the camera just so you can get a good glimpse there of that thickness. So normal thickness is what I would call this one, and I would stuff this with a regular backer board, and that would probably be just fine for a press. You know, get the backer board in there nice and good. So if that's normal, then you might be asking yourself, what is anormal or atypical? And in another video, I actually showed you that on this Darth Vader #1. If you open this up, this has these really intense M kind of shaped staples that are very clearly up and down. These were machined with a lot of force, you can tell, because the staple tears on these are in every issue that you pick up, and you can see it if we pick this up and look, you can see it on both the top and the bottom prong of both staples. It's quite clearly there. And these staples are huge as you look at them. And so if you did only a regular backer board in this comic, you for sure would end up with a big M shape pressed on either the front or the back cover of the book. So because of that, what I would do for this book is actually do probably 2 backer boards. These are the largest staples I think you'll regularly encounter, are these big M-shaped ones, and I would give that a 2 backer board thickness. That would probably work out well. Now, one caution about this is as you fill up that space between, because you're probably asking, well, if the staple can push through, why don't I just overload the middle with you know, 3 backer boards or whatever to keep it from ever having any risk of doing that. Well, if you put too much stuff in the middle, then you're going to be pulling those covers further apart as you press it, and what's going to happen is that staple is going to shoot in, and you're going to end up with a sunken staple after you pull your book out of your press. And so it's really important to match that backer board, but also the total stack of your comic book to be an appropriate thickness. So on this book with these really large staples, I would not put anything under the front cover or the back cover. And so usually pressers will put something between the back cover and the last page. They'll put something in the centerfold, and then they'll put something under the front cover. And the reason to put stuff behind the covers is, you know, as I've shown in other videos, often this material is different. So on a, you know, book in the 80s or 60s or 70s, you have a cover of one manufacturer and you might have newsprint on the interior. And what you don't want to do is have any chemicals or tanning from that newsprint transfer to the cover as you press it and push in. So it's important to put something there to keep that from squishing and transferring into here. Otherwise, you can end up with what's called the transfer stain on the inside, where it stains in the middle of the yellow. And so that's something to be avoided. So to do that, usually what you'll do is put a sheet of paper or a sheet of cardstock under the cover. In this particular book, though, if I'm going to put 2 full backer boards here at the centerfold, that's going to be a lot of thickness. And so to prevent that staple from getting pushed in on the comic book, what I'm going to do is absolutely skip anything under the front cover, and I'm going to skip anything under the back cover. And that'll be a problem also if I'm trying to pop out spine ticks, because usually sticking something under there gives the spine something to push along, and it helps you remove those spine ticks. So if I have spine ticks on an issue like this, I might have to iron it out or be a little bit more careful. Or maybe what I do is go in with only a single sheet of printer paper under that cover. But my first press on this one would be 2 backer boards in the center and nothing under the covers. Okay, moving on. Oh, so one other thing about those big fat staples, the other issue I already kind of showed you that had that same issue here is this Spider-Gwen #1. So this was super common for this era of Marvel. And you can see again, you have those really big M staples. So if I bring that up, you can clearly see that staple is just gigantic. And you can see it over here too. That is just a really big staple right in there. And it's big not only coming out of the page at you, but it's super thick compared to the other staples that I was showing. And so this one, again, I would try to do 2 backer boards in the middle, and I would try to skip anything under the front cover or back cover, and hopefully that would help me get out. As you can see here, there's a spine curl or a stacking curl going through there. So if you check the glare right in this area, you should be able to see a little bit of a stacking curl. There's a little bit of a loop under there, but that's okay. That one hasn't been pressed yet. Okay, so if those staples are too big, you might ask yourself, what is too small of a staple? Well, this is an Amazing Spider-Man 798, beautiful Alex Ross Green Goblin cover. Who doesn't love a good showdown between Spider-Man and the Green Goblin, one of the ultimate classic villains? All right, so in this one, we have staples that I would consider too small. These are definitely smaller than the average staple. And so for these, what I might do instead of doing that full backer board is I might start with only 2 to 3 sheets of the cardstock paper, because these are going to be noticeably thinner than a normal staple. And so if I put these down by comparison, you know, that'll line up. And I tend to err on the side of being slightly too fat. So if I'm nervous about this, I would probably go get a 3rd sheet of cardstock and line that up with those staples. And that should be okay. Now, the reason I chose this copy instead of another book to show you is you'll notice this staple right here has some issues. It's overlapped onto itself. And so as a presser, you really want to pay attention to that staple overlap. And I'm going to show you an issue where it's going to be a lot more of a problem. So in this particular case, that staple overlap, especially down here, it's kind of sitting on top of itself. But if we imagine that book being closed, those staples are going to be on top of themselves kind of in this direction. So they're not going to be overlapped on top of each other. They're going to be kind of overlapped in the same plane as the comic book. And that's going to be critical because if I think about, you know, this in its closed state and those staples this way, I haven't added any thickness. They're just kind of sitting next to each other, you know, like so. Because of that, I don't need to adjust my stack in any particular way because they're not adding thickness. If they're this way, which I'll get to here in a little bit, now I've doubled my thickness because I've got one finger on top of the other finger. And because of that, I have staples that are twice as fat. And so this is going to be a big problem, but this way is okay. All right, now having a staple that's too small is not only an issue for some books of modern make, it's also an issue for some books from the 1980s. And particularly for that, it's going to be these alternate publisher comic books from the 1980s. So here I have an original Mirage run, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles issue 58. It's actually in really good condition given the overall shape of the black cover. It's got a little bit of a do up here that I'll have to roll out and press out. This book also has not been pressed. But these books from Mirage, from Fantagraphics, from the early Malibu Suns, all of those are notorious. Oh, Bone #1. So if you ever see early first print issues of Bone, all of those have way too small of staples. So if you open this up, this has the teeny tiny staples, just like that Amazing Spider-Man. It's much smaller than a Marvel or DC book of that same era. And so when thinking about pressing this book, I would do the exact same thing where I would probably use 3 issues of cardstock and see. And you'll know if it needs a repress after that, or if you're using too much pressure, because also on some of these books I'll back off the pressure just a touch. But you'll be able to see a light imprint of the staple right here. If you really overdo it, that damage will be totally irreversible. But if you just overdo it a smidge, you'll be able to fix that with a repress if you do see a little silhouette of a staple. It's only a problem if you really, really overdo it. But I edge on the side of being just a little too much in the middle if I'm in doubt. That way I won't see the shadow there. But again, the risk of jamming it all fat in the middle is you'll cause a sunken staple. And that's particularly a problem with an issue like this one. So this is an Usagi Yojimbo Summer Special. It's a great issue. I'm a huge Stan Sakai and Usagi Yojimbo fan. This one not only retells El Beto 2, but it has some original story as well. And most cool, I love this wraparound cover. So you can see Usagi trying to defend off Lord Noriyuki there, who's hiding behind him with Spot, the ever popular sidekick, and he's trying to defend him from the ninja clan here on the back. If we open this up to the middle, you'll notice 2 things, one of which is the staple rust is there, and the staple rust has already started to migrate to the paper. And so another thing about these alternate publishers from the 1980s that you might not realize until you open them up is that they are notorious for staple rust. So if you ever see a Ninja Turtles Turtle Mania Summer Special that doesn't have staple rust, buy it, because it's an elite issue just from the virtue of not having staple rust. So you can see this staple looks pretty good on the outside. This one has a little bit of red tinge up top, but if you open it up, you can see both staples are indeed rusted. So again, don't be shy about opening up books before you buy them. And that staple rust migration, where you see that red on the page, that's going to be irreversible, and eventually it'll be brittle. But you can see that this is, a really fine staple in there, and it's a little bit more noticeable down here on the bottom staple. And this is a double fat issue, so you can see that right there. And so by virtue of this being a double fat issue and having these really, really fine staples, this thing is going to be a delicate one to press if you don't want to sink that staple more. And if you look down at it straight down, you can actually see that staple is already, and this staple are already partially recessed. That's a common problem on this issue. It's also a problem on books like G.I. Joe #1, because that book, again, was double fat and it had regular size staples. So when thinking about those books, on this one, I would probably err on the side of having too little stacking material on the inside instead of too much, because even if I'm off a little bit, that imprint of the staple is not going to get through all these pages to show up on the cover. So on this one, you can err on the side of too little, not too much. The staple indents are generally reversible, again, if they're not too intense, but a sunken staple is another matter. So that's going to be a lot bigger problem. So definitely err on too little on that one. This is another issue that I thought would have a similar concern. So you can see here, this Amazing Spider-Man 600 is a double fat issue. If we look at it on the side, it too has fairly shallow staples. It's quite narrow if we look at it there. And if we look at it in the centerfold here, where I had my... So these staples, again, are going to be quite fine in there if you zoom up and look. And this one, again, is going to have that same overlap concern as that other issue I showed you before, where if we tilt it, you can see that the staple is, in fact, overlapped, but it's going to be overlapped this way, not this way. So again, what we need to be concerned about is this way, where we've doubled the thickness of those staples. Being overlapped like this is okay. And in this one, maybe it's actually both. I think it actually might be both now that I'm looking at it. So you just want to be aware of that when you press it. This one, I would probably adjust that staple, as I'll talk about here in a minute. And again, I would use much less buffer material than I normally would, because it's a fat comic and I don't want to recess those staples again by stretching out if I put too much stuff in there, there's too much space. And then when the comic has to adjust because of that volume between my hands, the staple is going to have to go in to compensate. There's only so much material to stretch, and it can only stretch so far. This would be a totally beautiful issue, but you can see that there's a very small amount of color rub right down here. It's very tragic. It's part of the reason why I haven't slabbed this one. Oh well. Okay, so, I showed you normal, then too big, then too small. I'm going to give you one more example of normal here. This is a relatively new comic, Mandalorian number 4, just printed. And in here, I would say these are, again, going to be normal size staples. So we can zoom up and look at that. Who doesn't love a good story with Grogu and the Mandalorian? Who's excited for the next season? I'm very excited. So you can see, again, normal staple size there. Neither of these are sunken. You'll notice that this one is slightly misstapled. So ever so slightly here, if we look at it straight down, we see no staple. If I flip it over on the back, you can see that the staples are just slightly kind of tilted up off the back. That's a manufacturing thing. You're not going to do anything about that when you press it, but indeed the staple is on the back cover of this one. Okay, here's another example of a quote normal staple. This is a Batman number 657. This is the first cover of Damian Wayne here, Bruce Wayne's son. So right there is a good one. And then we've got another one right there, and then these look normal. So this one would be a one backer fit for me. So on this particular comic here, I would just slide one backer board in the middle, and I would probably put a sheet of cardstock under the front cover and the bottom cover, especially because I've got some tick there and a little bit of tick there, and it has a little bit of a spine roll. So this one should press out just nice like that. Okay, the final thing I wanted to go over here is staples crisscrossed the wrong way. And for this example here, I have an Astonishing X-Men number 4. This is just a fantastic cover that brings me right back to my youth. The Age of Apocalypse kind of dates me in terms of my, maturity to a comic book collector. And I really loved, not only having Rogue be married to Magneto, but also having her lead up her own X-Men team. I thought it was awesome. And this cover, I just love. I love the orange. I love the green in the middle. I love the whole team lined up on either side. It's just a great one. Okay, on to the staples here. You can see that what I wanted to draw your attention to is this top one. On this top one here, you can see that the top prong is straight and the bottom prong is out, and it's stuck this way. And so if we turn that sideways, we're going to be in our crisscrossed finger region. So if I turn that and you push straight down here, that press is going to be pushing through the bottom prong and the top prong of that staple. And because of that, it's going to feel the staple as if it were two staples. And so what we need to do is adjust that so that the bottom prong here does not overlap on the top prong. And so when I am adjusting staples, I use two little devices here, one of which is a regular tweezers you can pick up pretty much anywhere. And this is actually a flathead screwdriver that is designed for like a really small kit. I think it was originally like a eyeglasses repair kit or something, but it's a nice flathead screwdriver. It's not really sharp, it's blunted, which is important. And these tweezers, you'll notice have like a little inset prong, and so you can get a pretty good grip with them. And so what I'm gonna do is use the screwdriver as a support kind of under the page to give me a little bit of grip. And I'm gonna just slide that under that top staple, and then I'm going to move with my tweezers here on the staple. It's gonna be really hard to videograph, so I might just try it with my finger here just so I don't get the screwdriver in the way. And I'm just trying to, without too much pressure, just tweak that staple ever so slightly, and that's exactly where I want it to go. Because now, instead of being crisscrossed this way, they are crisscrossed on top of each other. And when I close that book now, those staples are going to be this way, not this way. And so because they're this way, you know, the thickness of this finger and this finger are the same finger, and then when you push down on them, the press is only going to feel one thickness. This way, it's going to feel two thicknesses. And so definitely on modern books, and that issue for staples, all right, so this book goes back a ways. So this is a 1995. You'll notice, by the way, for a 95 book, it does have a glossed interior, which is kind of unique in its own right. You know, it's kind of the end of the newsprint era. But for a 1995 book, it's, you know, a goodie, I think. Okay, but this issue of the staples occurs really in all eras, and it's particularly an issue for modern books if you don't open them all the way up. This just happened to be the first one in the pile that I found, and importantly here, you can just see that those staples now are lined up. Yeah, that'll press out okay, doesn't it? Yep, that's exactly what I want it to be. I want it to be this way, not this way. All right, cool. So if you found this video helpful, please give me a like, a thumbs up, a subscribe, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, etc. And you know what? Even if you didn't find this useful, please just give me a subscribe and a like and a thumbs up anyway. All right, take care, everybody. Thank you for the watch.